Key Out of Time by Andre Norton, Chapter 18, The Final Chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. Key Out of Time by Andre Norton. Chapter 18, World in Doubt. The day was dully overcast, as all days had been since they had begun this sulk and march penetration into the mountain territory. Ross could not accept the idea that the Poana might actually command wind and wave, storm and sun, as the Avacacans firmly believed, but the gloomy weather had favored them so far. And now they reached the last breathing point before they took the plunge into the heart of the enemy country. About the way in which they were to make that plunge, Ross had his own plan, one he did not intend to share with either Ash or Karawa, though he had to outline it to one now waiting here with him. "This is still your mind, younger brother?" He did not turn his head to look at the cloaked figure. "It is still my mind." Ross could be firm on that point. The Terran backed out of the vantage place from which he had been studying the canyon-like valley cupping the Baldy spaceship. Now he got to his feet and faced Wylan, his own gray cloak bellowing out in the wind to reveal the rover scale armor underneath. "You can do it for me?" he asked in turn. During the past days, the Poana had admitted that the weird battle within the Citadel had weakened and limited their magic. Last night they had detected a force barrier ahead, and to transport the whole party through that by teleporting was impossible. "Yes, you alone. Then my wand would be drained for a space. But what can you do within their hold, save be meat for their taking?" "There cannot be too many of them left there. That's a small ship. They lost 5 at the Citadel, and the rovers have 3 prisoners. No sign of the scout ship we know they have, so more of them must be gone in it. I won't be facing an army, and what they have in the way of weapons may be powered by installations in the ship. A lot of damage done there. Or even if the ship lifted." He was not sure of what he could do. This was a venture depending largely on improvisation at the last moment. "You propose to send off the ship?" "I don't know whether that is possible. No, perhaps I can only attract their attention. Break through the force shield so the rest may attack." Ross knew that he must attempt this independent action, that in order to remain the Ross Murdoch he had always been, he must be an actor, not a spectator. The Poana did not argue with him now. "Where?" Her long sleeve rippled as she gestured to the canyon. Dull as the skies were overhead, there was light here, too much of it for his purpose as the ground about the ship was open. To appear there might be fatal. Ross was grasped by another and much more promising idea. The Poana had transported them all to the deck of Torgo's cruiser after asking him to picture it for her mentally. And to all outward appearances, the Baldy ship before them now was twin to the one which had taken him once on a fantastic voyage across a long-vanished stellar empire. Such a ship he knew. "Can you put me in the ship?" "If you have a good memory of it, yes." "But how know you these ships?" "I was in one once for many days. If these are alike, then I know it well." "And if this is unlike, to try such may mean your death." He had to accept her warning. Yet outwardly this ship was a duplicate. And before he had voyaged on a derelict, he had also explored a wrecked freighter on his own world thousands of years before his own race had evolved. There was one portion of both ships which had been identical, save for size, and that part was the best for his purpose. "Send me here." With closed eyes, Ross produced a mental picture of the control cabin. Those seats, which were not really seats, but webbing support swinging before banks of buttons and levers. All the other installations he had watched, studied, until they were as known to him as the plate bulkheads of the cabin below in which he had slept. Very vivid, that memory. He felt the touch of the Fuana's cool fingers on his forehead. Then it was gone. He opened his eyes. No more wind and gloom. He stood directly behind a pilot's web slung, facing a vista plate and rows of controls, just as he had stood so many times in the derelict. He had made it. This was the control room of the spacer, and it was alive. The faint thrumming in the air, the play of lights on the boards. Ross pulled the crown of the Fuana cloak up over his head. He had had days to accustom himself to the bulk of the robe, but still its swathings were sometimes a hindrance rather than a help. Slowly he turned. There were no Baldies here, but the well door to the lower levels was open, and from it came small sounds echoing up the communication ladder. The ship was occupied. Not for the first time since he had started on this venture, Ross whooshed for more complete information. Doubtless, several of those buttons or levers before him controlled devices which could be the greatest aid to him now. But which and how he did not know. Once in just such a cabin he had meddled, and in activating a long silent installation, had called the attention of the Baldies to their wrecked ship, to the Terrans looting it. Only by the merest chance had the vengeance of the stellar spacemen fallen in on the Russian investigators, and not on his own people. He knew better than to touch anything before the pilot station, but the banks of controls to one side were concerned with the inner well-being of the ship, and they tempted him. To go it blind was, however, more of a risk than he dared take. There was one future precaution for him. From a very familiar case beside the pilot's seat, Ross gathered up a collection of discs, sorted through them hastily for one which bore a certain symbol on its covering. There was only one of these. Slapping the rest back into their container, Ross pressed a button on the control board. Again his guess paid off. Another disc was exposed as a small panel slid back. Ross clawed that out of the holder, put in its place the one he had found. Now, if his choice had been correct, the crew who took off in this ship, unless they checked their route tape first, would find themselves heading to another primitive planet and not returning to base. Perhaps exhaustion of fuel might ground them past hope of ever regaining their home port again. Next to damaging the ship, which he could not do. This was the best thing to ensure that any enemy leaving Avakaki would not speedily return with a second expeditionary force. Ross dropped the root disc he had taken out into a pocket on his belt, to be destroyed when he had the chance. Now he cat-footed across the deck to look into the well and listen. The walls glowed with diffused light. From here the Terran could count at least 4 levels under him, with perhaps another. The bottom 2 ought to be supplies and general storage. Then the engine room, tech labs above, and next to the control room the living quarters. Through the fabric of the ship, shivering up his body from the soles of his feet, he could feel the vibration of engines at work. One such must control the force field which ringed this canyon, perhaps even powered the weapons the invaders could turn against any assault. Ross whirled about, his Fuana cloak in a wide swing. There was one control which he knew. Yes, again the board was the same as the one he was familiar with. His hand plunged out and down, raking the lever from one measure point to the very end of the slit in which it moved. Then he planted himself with his back to the wall. Whoever came up the well hunting the cause of the failure would be facing the other way. Ross crouched a little, pushing the cape well back on his shoulders to free his arms. There was a feline suppleness in his stance, just as a jungle cat might wait coming of its prey. What he heard was a shout below, the click of footgear on the rungs of the level ladder. Ross's lips drew back in a snarl, which was also feline. He thought that would do it. Spacemen were ultra-sensitive to any failure in air flow. White head, bare of any hair, thin shoulders a little hunched under the